Hi everyone, good morning and welcome to the 2021 Enterprise Architecture Live event. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's all very exciting to have you all back for our digital events this year. We're really looking forward to what we have ahead for you, particularly today. So just a little bit of context on why we're putting on the Enterprise Architecture Live event this year. 2020 was very crazy for everybody, and 2021 is going to be very busy for everybody as we try and reestablish ourselves in this new post-COVID operating environment. And enterprise architects have had the challenge of establishing their own relevance in organizations whilst also developing and advancing strategies to business that transform the outcomes for business and customers. And these challenges have just been scaled by a pandemic that has stripped the ability to interact and share ideas and strategies with the greater EA community and colleagues. So that's why we've decided to put this on for you guys, particularly as we lead into our in-person event in April, which we're hoping to be able to deliver very soon for you all. But without taking too much time of the morning away, I will introduce our first really incredible speaker this morning, Mark Crawshaw. Mark is the founder and general manager of Aplas, and he is here to talk to you guys about mapping your software architecture to drive consensus and agreement. So Mark, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Isaac. Welcome, everyone. It's great to be with you today. I'm going to be talking about mapping your software architecture to drive understanding and agreement within your organization. I'm the founder of Aplas. I'm the creator of software mapping, as it's known in Aplas. And today I'm going to be giving you sort of a behind the scenes look at the challenges we've faced over the last 6 years as we've brought software maps to some of the world's largest and most innovative companies. Now, I'm going to be talking about software architecture, but not how to alter it or how to make it more or less complex, but really to discuss how we understand it as humans, as employees, and more specifically as enterprise architects, how we help others that are often less technically literate or have a narrower organizational perspective to comprehend complex systems of software. So I come, I'm sure, like many of you, from the guts of these technology software landscapes. I used to lead middleware competency centers, work in enterprise architecture, development, testing, support. So I've spent a lot of time working to improve software architecture, but just as much time struggling to communicate with people and gain consensus about where and when to invest. So at Aplas, our focus is on the science of how people understand software and can make more informed decisions around it. Enterprise architecture obviously plays a critical role, especially as organizations become more agile and more fragmented in the structure of their change delivery. The roles of EA, especially ones around being an enabler and driver of organizational change and across boundary communicator, are just becoming more and more critical. However, this might seem obvious to state, but there's an obvious fundamental constraining factor in the ability for EAs to deliver and act in these roles. And that's just the complexity of the underlying software. If you have a lot less software, it's going to be considerably easier to manage the organizational and the digital change. And we think this significantly eliminates the effectiveness of EAs. So how do we attack this, and how do we attack it head on? So the first and most obvious option is just reduce the complexity. So if we had 100 applications rather than 1,000, 200 integrations rather than 2,000, it would be considerably simpler, but that doesn't always happen. The environmental factors around the business or the best laid plans mean that often that the software is increasing, not decreasing. And so the second option is that we just get better at understanding and communicating with complex software architecture. And we believe for the vast majority of businesses, really this is the only long-term option. So let's jump straight into the end and talk about what a software map looks like. If you haven't seen one already, we can talk about that. And the general area of research that we sit in, which is software intelligence. So when I introduce software mapping, I like to start from the perspective of a new graduate that has been onboarded to the technology organisation and a new project. At the heart of what we do at Aplas here is to empower everyone with a better understanding of software. And really, there's nothing more unempowering if you're starting an organisation and you're trying to understand what's where. And really the only hope you have is word of mouth or some documentation repositories that you can search through. So this is a software map. It's for a smaller enterprise of 100 applications and 500 integrations. And it's with this capability, I'm able to explain to this new starter how a software map represents the entire digital nervous system of this business, of their business. I'm able to show via these land masses what the business architecture is, the core marketing, accounting, manufacturing in a very simple, with an organic looking structure for an intended reason. And then we're able to zoom in and explain that the core business unit is what area that this particular graduate is working within. And we can show how the applications, the nodes and the lines are all about showing the software architecture on top of the business architecture. We can talk about this hyperlocal core system that is the largest part of the work around this project, this theoretical project. And we can see that high-level information about it, maybe the SME contact for them. From here, they can see all the integrations that are sitting around this particular application. And they can also have a look at more complicated things on this map. And we can explain that the social media order process is actually what they're going to be working on in this particular theoretical project. And so they can hover over the different steps and then see how the application hyperlocal is involved in the broader business process. So we think this is really a revolutionary thing for onboarding people, and it might seem like a trivial example for an EA conference, but this level of simplicity in explaining it, things around software and around business architecture, we think is really sorely needed, not for conversations just with the graduates, but also with conversations at the executive level. How can we simplify the stories we tell around software to allow anyone to understand it? So let's jump back to the slides. So today I'm going to be talking through the blueprint for how we think about this problem at Aplas. So whether you're considering our solution or not, I'm hoping you can walk away with a better understanding of the challenges and the possible solutions in this space. And this space, it's generally known, the broader research area is known as software intelligence. And it's this idea of bringing, much like business intelligence brings information from across the processes and data stores of the organization to provide these cross-cutting dashboards and analytics. We're trying to do the similar thing with software. And the end goal is really simple. It's to create a living index or catalog of software asset metadata that can be understood by anyone, regardless of the technology domain you're in. And then with this index to create a software map that really breaks through the complexity of understanding software architecture. And for this index to be created from the SDLC itself, from the existing sources of this data, and ensuring that it's always up to date. And then when anything does change, it doesn't matter if the visualization has already been built. We need that visualization to update. Any of the stories or styles we tell on top of the software map need to update automatically. And the goal is always to be completely automated end to end. Now, we're going to run through these challenges one by one, and I'll show you bits of the product and give you a bit of an insight as we go about how we solve them too. So the first one is all about a common schema. And so software intelligence aims to bring together information from across the SDLC and the organization. And this is a really challenging goal within itself. And the key is really, the trick is really to bring only the key information that's required to index the software. And that key information needs to be as broadly consumable as possible, not as deep in any particular technical domain. And if you do want people to understand the information still, it's just a matter of linking to those other systems rather than bringing that deep technical information into Aplas. So let me jump over into the product now, and I'll just give you a quick idea of what that looks like. So this is the homepage for this fictitious Acme Corporation. I'm going to go into Studio now, where we design indexes, maps, and styles. And I'll click on the indexes area, and we can see we have our primary enterprise index here. Creating a new index, just a minute, clicking on new, call this one test, and we can grab some information from sample data. We can also grab something from Excel, APIs. There's a lot of ways and connectors ways we can bring information in. We'll go ahead and create that. And now we have this new index with 100 applications and 500 integrations. And the data model in Aplas, and this might be in the Q&A, one of the first questions that you ask, is it's designed to be incredibly simple. So applications and integrations are really the concrete things we see on the map. And they represents the nodes and the interconnections. And really, why is it just those two things being the key things in Aplas? It's because that is what people generally understand across IT. APIs and so on, they're understood to a certain level, but in certain areas, but not across IT. Collections and components. Collections are about lists of things that can represent business processes, project scope on top of the applications and integrations. And components are about things that are sitting underneath the applications integrations, like software libraries, infrastructure, and so on. So that's what a software index looks like. And it's also possible, once the software index is built, to then customize what you put into it. So there's a handful of fields we require, and then the rest of the index can be built up by fields that are particular to your organization. So that might be financial information for a particular story you want to tell on top of the software map, and a whole range of information you can add to that, to applications, integrations, components, and collections. The next biggest challenge is the one we all probably know and are challenged by, which is how do we visualize things at scale? So I remember at the start of my career, a lot of companies I worked for had this single page enterprise-wide architectural diagram, often printed on an A1 or A2 and scrolled up into something. And it was useful when the scale of the software wasn't as big as it is today. Someone had to obviously manually update every time an application was added or removed in Visio. And if you had an unnatural obsession with Visio, these were the good old days. But for most businesses now, these are relics. There aren't these sort of software maps that are generally available on a single page anymore. So geographic mapping is really where the source of a lot of our R&D has gone into this, and it really shows how a broad set of people can understand a really complicated set of nodes and interconnections, that being the real world. And allowing anyone to understand this incredibly complex network is really an incredible thing that we take for granted when we log into Google Maps and navigate around every day. And so a lot of our research has taken how these engines operate, these 3D rendering engines operate from GIS. And I just want to show you a little bit now about how a software map works in Aplas. So creating a software map is simple as coming into a map area. So I'm just going to run through this quickly and selecting the index we just created and asking it for it to be auto-built. It'll take a few seconds here to build up the sum, and then we can click build. So it went onto our backend service, and the map was built from those 100 applications. Everything uses these force physics ML algorithms to design this in a way that reduces the line distance, ensures that it's as simple as possible to understand, and it doesn't burden the viewer cognitively too much. So the big challenge with the map often is just how to render it. So we support organizations with thousands of applications, thousands of integrations. This is a much smaller map, but we can zoom out and you can understand how we can handle a much larger scale here. And then we zoom in, we see more information. Initially, we don't see the labels for these systems, and we zoom in further and further. We start to see the labels for the core systems and for the satellite systems. And this allows us to really abstract out and then get into a lot more specific detail without changing the coordinate system and losing everyone in the process. Why is this on a hexagonal grid? You're probably wondering. Well, a lot of this was taken from how public transport maps work. The London Underground, for example, they use hexagonal grids to reduce the number of angles the lines travel on. And this allows us to, again, reduce that cognitive burden that people, when they see that cobweb, and it kind of freaks a lot of people out, and they just can't engage into the map. They can't even start to think about what you're trying to explain on top of it because it looks so complicated. And so the hexagonal lines also help with how these lines are drawn, and we also bring them together, a bit like the underground tubes often are. They pull the lines together regardless if the tunnels are actually directly on top of each of themselves. And that actually is a different way. It helps us with interacting with the map as well. So I can click on a particular spindle of channels, we call this, and then we can see all the integrations that are traveling between these applications. So it's a really good user interface way of interacting with the map as well. So that's just a couple of insights into how software mapping works. I won't go into too much detail, but suffice to say there's a custom-built rendering engine in Aplas that handles this problem for us. The third big challenge is the domain-specific views. So one of the most frustrating things about building products is that customers ask for radically different approaches to what you might have originally thought of, considered when you designed them. And this happened when we started with our first alpha customers about 4 or 5 years ago. They were blown away by the software map and how it could show their software architecture in a much simpler fashion. But then they wondered whether they can put things on top of that map to show the cost increase, maybe extruding out of the application to show how that's changing over time, to show cloud migration statuses and so on. And so what we realized very quickly is GIS has solutions for this, and that's much like a weather map overlays on top of a base map, or you can see property increases suburb by suburb. We can also do that with a software mapping platform. And so I'll just show you how these styles work and how really relevant they are to architecture and how they are able to tell these powerful stories. So all of these can actually be seen in our showcase if you go to our public site. But I'll just jump into the financial one to begin with, and we'll have a look at that. So we bring the base map. All the applications are still in the same place from when I showed you that initial map. But now we can have a look at the life cycle costs on an application. So a really powerful way, not just to see the cost per application, but to see per business unit, the level of cost and the scale in which each business unit's operating at. Then we might be able to see different elements of the cost, database costs, server costs, DR costs overlaid as well. So we don't define as a platform company what these look like. These styles can be built, and there's lots of them to check out in the showcase. They can be built by you by coming into the style system, creating a new style, and then you can pick the template, and then you can go and build these. Similar to Illustrator, you add layers in, and then you're able to link them into custom fields in your index and really display anything you like and tell any story. And these stories are incredibly powerful at a GMs of IT and executive level when you're talking about, really needing to simplify your software architecture to a level to get your point across. The next challenge is really sort of looking at the other tools that we have available to us. And there's lots of existing tools that store software asset metadata. The big challenge with a lot of them is they're often built for particular workflows. So service management tools, enterprise architecture tools, software development tools, they're all built to handle particular workflows for particular domains in IT. And this really makes them very difficult for anyone else to understand and interact with because they're very complex and focused on that particular user group. And so in Aplas, we kind of turn that on its head. We don't, by default, when you create an index, map, or style, really think about it being used by anyone except the people that are authoring those things. Then we have a separate idea, which is the idea of publishing out these interfaces into your organization. And so if we jump back into the product, what we saw there when we looked at Acme's home is what view users can see. There's a non-author users in the product, what they can see. And these are a series of interfaces that are published out to a particular URL. You can embed them in your portal, IT portal, if you like. And really they allow us to target specific use cases, particular user groups. And so if we go into Studio and click Publications, you can see how these are all published out. And creating one is just a matter of, again, giving it a name, selecting the source, and then we can choose to publish a meta search out. This is where we publish an index directly out. And meta search is just like a Google search for software. It's a very, very simple way of, and it's very popular, in organizations. Because where there might be 10 or 20 architects that are helping maintain the Aplas, in a lot of organizations, there's hundreds of view users that are coming in just to be able to quickly search and find software asset metadata, find the SME, and in and out of Aplas in 5 or 10 seconds. So lots of different interfaces and different ways of getting the data out. And then finally is connectivity. Like many business intelligence tools, half the battle is bringing the data into the analytics platform before we can model it and report on it. And software intelligence is similar in that we need to pull information in. And so really this isn't something that happens overnight. It takes time to build this and to think about how software intelligence as a discipline is required to provide this single view and to help people understand software better. And we provide a lot of help with that. And we know organizations often before we get to them, they've already done a lot of work in that space already. Maybe they're pulling JSON files out of source code repositories. Maybe they're pulling information out of Confluence, out of documentation in there. There's a lot of different ways we already do that, but it's really about creating some more rigor around that process. And so we have a very comprehensive API that allows you to integrate with Aplas and keep information up to date. Master data management principles are embedded into Aplas, like the idea of IDs being this sort of shared ID that can be a single ID that can be shared across the organization to help sync this data. And we also have pre-built connectors that we're constantly building out that allow us to just configure a connection with Confluence, GitHub, ServiceNow, and we're building those out all the time to help bring information into Aplas in a configurable, automated way. So the final one, I think it is, is stability and maintenance. And so this is one of these tricks that you often don't consider day one because you build out a new architecture diagram and use it for a particular purpose. And then the challenge is when do you come back to it? How do you update it? How do you know where you were? What needs to be brought in? How do you get that back into sync? And so we think this is really important because if we keep changing, if we keep building new architecture diagrams every time we set up need to visualize and tell a story around software, then everything's often in a different place. The channel systems might have been at the top, now they're at the bottom. And this really loses everyone. All the effort that you've gone to help to get people to understand this software architecture is lost. And so we think that the stability of the map is one of the key things, so that the business units stay in the same place generally as the applications change. And so we the way that we operate with this is that we're able to receive updates from the index and then do minimal updates to the map. So it's still always up to date. It's automatically kept up to date all the time. But we're able to do things where the map doesn't, just adding one application doesn't just shift the map around. And so it's really about trying to create a place for software so that it can be tangible and meaningful to your entire organization over time. So finally, before we go into questions, it's really, I hope you learned a bit from how we think about this and how we've helped other organizations. There's really a range of challenges in dealing with creating a central index and a map for software. But we really strongly believe, and we see this evidence so much with our customers, that software intelligence is really able to make your whole organisation, everyone in the technology organisation outside it, make better decisions around software and make them much, much faster. And we think that the roles of enterprise architecture are really greatly supported and strengthened when everyone has a better understanding and access to software metadata. So when you walk into the room, there's just a better level of understanding about the challenges you're facing. So finally, the recommendation is really just to consider the accessibility of software asset metadata as broadly as possible. Who can access, what's the access the developers have, testers have, and so on, and how it really might be limiting your technology organisation. That's all I wanted to say today. I'd love to open up to questions and see what you think.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. That was fantastic. Really appreciate that, and it was very insightful for our audience and myself as well. So thank you so much for joining us. I do have a question for you here, and it is, where does the system get the information to automatically update?
So that's the big challenge. How do you get this information into Aplas? There's two parts to this. There's the how do we do it initially? So how do you get started with Aplas? One of the best ways to do it is just to find the information wherever you can. And often when we're helping customers, it's in Excel somewhere or in a service desk tool, and just get the minimal information into the tool to create a software map. Once you have a software map, that really starts to drive everyone's interest in then looking at how you look after software asset metadata and the syncing of that in the long term. And then it really depends on the organization. So I just suggest it to jump on the website, click the Get Demo button and have a chat with us. Some companies will automatically pull information from their source code repositories, so they'll disseminate the authoring job. So developers will just update those repositories with some metadata in these JSON files. It will automatically call an API in Aplas, and in a few seconds, the map will update. So what's great about that idea is that it creates a really good quality cycle. So a developer can update it and they can instantly see what they've contributed in the map, the whole of organizational map, and see how they're adding to it. So it's really just the short answer is there's a range of different things that get in touch and let's have a chat.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think, what would you say are the top 3 priorities for a company or individual who's looking to map their software architecture and maybe is in those early days? What would you say should be their 3 key priorities before they go ahead and do that?
Sure. The first one is definitely just to get a map up so that you can then share it with more people. And that doesn't take long at all. You can input something to CSV, you just need application name, the business unit that owns it, and if you've got integrations, then great, we can get that in there too. That's really the first thing to get that up. The second thing is to think about different stories you'd like to tell on the map. So the key thing to try and sell it internally to get more people interested is to tell some really timely stories. So maybe your organization's going through a digital transformation. Maybe there's a cloud enablement journey that is cross-organization and is really relevant at this time. So get that information in. So what's against each application, what's on-prem, what's currently in the cloud, or what different cloud providers they're in. Try and get that information and then create a style to show how there's different colors for different cloud environments. And that could be a really powerful way to tell that story. And the third thing, is then to, once you've got some engagement around this problem and people see it as a problem, then to start thinking about more in the long term about how to keep that update and how you start synchronizing and your software asset metadata.
Fantastic. Now we've got about 30 seconds before we have to wrap this up, but have you looked at how to use this to drive micro-segmentation for security?
I'd have to have a bit more of a specific chat about that with who asked that, but I'm happy to be on the call on the Q&A after this, and I can certainly answer some more questions. But the short answer is you can visualize anything on top of the software. As long as it's software related, you can visualize anything, whether that's security related or not. You can visualize it on the map.
Fantastic. And I'll also just add to everyone that feel free to connect with Mark on LinkedIn post-event, and you guys can all connect and discuss further post-event, which is definitely encouraged. But with that being said, I will have to wrap things up now for this session. But I'd just like to thank you, Mark, for joining us this morning and being our first presenter of the day. It was a really fantastic presentation, and I really appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, Isaac. Thanks for the invitation.
No problem. What we'll do now, guys, everyone will jump off this room and jump onto our next one, and we'll see you start at 9:35.